Hi, everyone. Welcome to Introducing Lantern, a multi-format OER publishing tool. I'm Christina Verdon, and I'll be moderating today's session. Lauren McKeen McDonald is the Open Education Librarian at Northwestern University Libraries, and Chris Diaz is the Digital Publishing Librarian and manages the Institutional Repository at Northwestern University. Live captioning is available during this presentation. You can toggle that on and off using the attendee controls at the bottom of your screen. The session will be recorded and provided on the conference website following the conference. There will also be any PowerPoints that are shared will be also provided on the conference website. Please enter all of your questions into the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the session. We encourage you to engage with us and the other attendees through the chat function. And if you have any technical issues, please contact Tracy Stout at missouristate.edu. I will go ahead and put her email address in the chat box for you in case you need to contact her. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you to our conference organizers for giving us the opportunity to present. We're coming to you from Evanston, Illinois, so a town just outside of Chicago. So we're excited to be presenting to an audience that's outside of our region. All right, so quick introductions. My name is Lauren McKeen McDonald. I have she, her pronouns. I'm the Open Education Librarian at Northwestern. What that entails is OER initiatives. So I'm responsible for managing our OER grant program. I provide consultations with faculty and instructors who are interested in adopting or creating OER. I provide promotion and training to other librarians and to people on campus. And then I also am responsible for helping to forge campus partnerships around course affordability and OER. And I'll let Chris introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Diaz, he, him pronouns. I'm the digital publishing librarian. So broadly speaking, I help faculty and students publish their original scholarly or educational materials online. I work with a variety of different publication types. OER is a big one, but I also work with monographs and journals and manage the IR. So happy to be here with you.
Yeah, and so for the past 2 years, we've been thinking about and prototyping and testing a methodology for OER production and publishing that we are releasing in a toolkit called Lantern. So we wanted to start just with a quick poll to find out how all of you publish OER and create OER. So Christina, could you launch that poll? The question is, I'll go ahead and read the question since it's up. What platforms or tools do you currently use to create and publish OER? And then we have sort of a long list because we know that there are a lot of options out there.
Are you all seeing the results come up?
I can't see them yet, no.
I'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Okay, just a couple of responses here, and both for Pressbooks is what I see. So yeah, we actually do not have Pressbooks at Northwestern. We have used the methods that we're talking about today. So we'll go ahead and share those now. I'll close that. And Chris, if you could go on to the next slide. All right, so to give you some about where we're coming from, Northwestern is a PhD granting institution that's in Evanston. We serve about 16,000 students, full-time students. That number is almost evenly split between graduates and undergraduate students. Back in 2017, the university began an initiative to increase the socioeconomic diversity of our student body. And that eventually led to the creation of a campus-wide group that has been focused on providing affordable course materials to our students. So through that group, we ended up creating an OER grant program, which gives faculty $5,000 grants to swap out their commercial textbooks for OER. And the grant program is focused on undergraduate courses. Chris and I are the two dedicated staff who work on OER production and promotion at Northwestern. So most of our OER work is born out of the grant program, but we do offer OER services to anyone on campus who's interested. We provide consultations, project management assistance, copyright assistance, web and PDF design, digital production, metadata, hosting, and long-term preservation. We haven't gotten to this point yet, mostly because the faculty who have been creating OER have been using their finished products within the within the learning management system in Canvas. But we do eventually plan to publish first editions of OER and make them discoverable within the Open Textbook Library and other OER repositories. On the right on this slide is a screenshot of the web version of one of our completed open textbooks, and it was created using Lantern, the toolkit we're sharing today. So when you begin any sort of new program or service, you're going to have to consider what tools and workflows you're going to use to make some of it happen. So some of you might remember this story, or maybe you experienced it yourself, but back in 2017, bPress, which is a platform that offers institutional repository services and editorial support for digital publishing, was purchased by Elsevier. We had bPress at the time. And the acquisition drew some major criticism from the library community, and it motivated us at Northwestern to try to find open source and platform independent methodologies for the production and publishing of educational and scholarly materials. So through that, we identified a few core skills that we needed in order to free us from some of the more easy to use tools that have been provided by third parties. And the ultimate goal has been to advance open infrastructure for scholarly communication. So the four fundamental digital skills that we identified are structured plain text, open source software, version control, and static web technologies. On to the next slide. Minimal computing is the framework around which we produce OER and other digital materials. The definition included here is computing done under a significant set of constraints. So at the start, minimal computing basically asks, what do we need when producing, disseminating, and preserving digital scholarship? And let's just stick to what we need. Next slide. One big minimal computing practice is to use plain text. So as someone with no prior programming experience, that's me. When I started working on this project, I didn't have any programming experience. This example sort of resonates with me. So you might be familiar with email clients that give you the option of writing an email in rich text or plain text. So the email on the left is written in plain text, and you can see from my signature that I have bolded font, I have hyperlinks, I have a different color. All of that is available within a rich text format. On the right is plain text. So at the click of a button, all of the text to plain text, and all of those formatting, visual formatting things just went away. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the advantages of plain text are that it's easy to read, it's accessible on all devices, it's sustainable, and it's future-proof. The plain text markup language that we use within Lantern is called Markdown. This is a quote from one of Markdown's original creators. Markdown is intended to be as easy to read and easy to write as is feasible. Readability, however, is emphasized above all else. A Markdown formatted document should be publishable as is, as plain text, without looking like it's been marked up with tags or formatting instructions. On to the next slide. And now I'll pass it over to Chris, and he'll give you more details about our project and how you can access it and begin using it.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the what Lantern is and how it works. Lantern began as an idea to try to come up with a sort of like a publishing system that is completely free, that uses free web services or open source software. It's very much experimental and uses a lot of like DIY methodologies. So it's not something that I would necessarily recommend as like what you have to be using or what you ought to be using, but it's definitely something that we want to share and we think is ready for others to start testing and to see if this might work for them. So what Lantern is it's a toolkit, it's a methodology, it's a way to make multi-format OER using either GitHub or using open source software on your own computer. It is not an all-in-one publishing solution, nor is it a platform. What really it is what we hope is that it is an on-ramp to learning fundamental digital skills that would essentially free us from over-reliance on easy-to-use platforms that might be extremely costly to sustain in the long term, or might run the risk of vendor lock-in, which is something that libraries are very familiar with in a lot of different contexts. So some of the features that we hope Lantern provides is that, well, it's free. You can install it. You can use it on GitHub or install it locally on your computer. Everything about it is cross-platform, meaning all of the files can be read, edited, or moved using any operating system, using any default text editing software. There's no proprietary files or no proprietary software required to use any of Lantern's materials. And then what ends up happening at the end of the publishing workflow with Lantern is that it's a static website. So you don't need to install a database or a content management system or any server-side software. It's just static HTML files that you can post on any web server for either free or for very, very little amount of money, which is good for long-term storage of these materials. We developed Lantern primarily for the people involved in the production, hosting, and maintenance of final OER content. So it could be librarians or instructional technologists or OER publishers. This is not something that I would recommend to most faculty authors, unless they're someone who is familiar with LaTeX or R Markdown or uses Python or any type of computational research or educational practices. They might see Lantern and be like, okay, I can use this. This is easy and makes sense. But for people coming from mostly a Microsoft Word or Google Docs writing environment, this is not something that I recommend for them. However, like I said, we want this to be an on-ramp for people who are involved in the production and hosting. And so our goal is to make this type of plain text open source software workflow to be approachable for people who are in a librarian or OER publisher role. So the high level workflow is that you get your OER manuscripts. We assume that you're getting a manuscript in docx or Google Doc format. Most people are writing in Microsoft Word. And so the acquisitions and content editing stage happens in those common word processing software tools. So you're, making sure that the content is in its final form. You're making sure that the headings and the links and everything is, and the references are formatted correctly. And then once you have your documents ready to be published, Lantern provides a script that will convert your manuscript files into plain text source material. And we use Markdown and another format called YAML, which I'll talk about later, as the primary source format of an OER project. And then from this source format, we can then easily produce web, print, ebook versions of the OER publication. And all of the production, editing, and publishing processes can either be done completely on GitHub in a web browser, or can be done on your own computer or server if you'd like. Here's an example of what a Lantern OER textbook looks like that we published recently. It is available at the URL below. And what Lantern provides is a static website with a landing page. There is a description panel with some metadata and ways to download the output format. So in this particular example, PDF, EPUB, docx is available for download. We provide docx, the Microsoft Word format, as a publication output because we want instructors from other institutions to be able to have an easily editable version of the OER textbook that they might want to use in their own teaching context. And then on the right is the full text HTML edition of the book as a screenshot. So what's happening under the hood is that Lantern was built on top of a command line program called Pandoc. Pandoc is a document converter that is highly extensible, and it was developed by a philosopher at the University of California at Berkeley. And so it comes with a lot of familiarity with academic writing and academic teaching and learning as its backend. But what's difficult about Pandoc is that it is so flexible and extensible that it can be really, really difficult to use if you're not familiar with command line tools or how to write a script. And so what Lantern does is it takes out all the guesswork of using Pandoc by providing you with pre-written scripts and a document template that is designed specifically for OER production use cases. So what Lantern is it's a folder structure. On the right is the folder structure in a nutshell. Basically, it's a folder with your text files, and then below that is a metadata file that is written in YAML, which I'll show you in a second. And then what Lantern also provides is a bash script that you just can run either in GitHub without knowing about it or on your own computer, and it will produce all of the file formats from that. So the first step of working with the manuscript is using your own common tools. This can be done in LibreOffice or Microsoft Word or Google Docs. And essentially what we try to train users to do is to format the original manuscripts using proper heading structures. So one thing that I do as part of my job is I'll get a Microsoft Word document that has headings that are signified by being centered or being bold. But that's not a semantic way to structure a document. And so what you can do in Microsoft Word, for example, is apply the heading styles in the appropriate places. And then that will then provide the structure for what the document is, so that when it gets converted to Markdown, the chapter title gets converted appropriately as the heading number 1. And then the section heading gets appropriately converted to heading number 2, as on the left is the Microsoft Word version, and then on the right is the Markdown plain text version of the same content. And Lantern, what that does is it will convert this for you. To get started, Lantern is available on GitHub for free. So the easiest way to get started is to log into GitHub, visit Lantern, and then click on Use This Template, which is a big green button on the homepage. And what this will do is it will copy the directory structure and all of the files into your own GitHub account. And then what you essentially have is an online workspace for your own project. And we provide a lot of documentation in the wiki on what to do with that. But to get you started, the first thing would be to edit the metadata.yaml file. which is something that you can do in the web browser on GitHub. And what this does is it contains the metadata, the bibliographic metadata about your project. So it includes information like title, subtitle, author, contributors, DOI, publication year. All of that is just structured in sort of like key value pairs. So the key would be the metadata field and the value would be the instance of that metadata for this particular project. So anyone who's familiar with like XML related metadata or JSON, this is a much simplified and streamlined format for structuring metadata about your OER project. The next thing you would do is you would take your manuscript files as Microsoft Word documents. They can be organized into chapters or into sections, or it can just be one big file. And what will happen is you can upload this to the original folder in GitHub, and then GitHub will automatically convert these Microsoft Word documents into Markdown documents in a new subdirectory folder called text. And so the conversion happens automatically. And then from there this is where you do your production editing and all of the files for the OER content is in this text folder as part of the Lantern project. So here is what one particular Markdown file for chapter 6 of an example OER project looks like. In the GitHub web interface, you can open up the Markdown file and see the actual Markdown formatted text. So what we're looking at right now is some paragraphs, an image, some italicized or bolded text. And so all of this can be done using GitHub, and we provide some training on how to use Markdown to format specific types of content elements within the content of the OER. One of the big values of using plain text over something like Microsoft Word to store the source material for an OER project is that Git and GitHub will give you extremely granular tracking and logging of different versions of the project over time. And so each time you save a new version of your project in the form of a commit, which is what Git uses as its terminology for a snapshot of your project in a particular moment in time, is that it will track different levels of what changed specifically. And so you don't need to worry about having file names that have like V2 or final version. All of that is just saved in the same history automatically in GitHub. And so on the left, you could see the old version of a particular equation, and on the right is what it looks like in the current state of the project. Some of the features that we thought about when we were developing Lantern is that we get a lot of OER authors who want to embed interactive web content. A lot of the people who seem to be interested in OER creation are people who want the web version in addition to the PDF, but they really like the ability to embed things like movable diagrams. So this is a diagram that can be edited in the browser, and it's just embedded from another source. You can also embed video. So here's an example of a faculty. This OER particular project was a material science OER textbook that we're working on. And so here's an example of the instructor talking through a particular process that is part of the course. Another thing that faculty really like about the web versions of OER is that you can have exercise questions throughout the text. And then, so what we did was we will display the actual question on the page and then have like a button for solution so that people can work on the question without seeing the solution. And then when they click on the button, the solution will be available as like kind of a drop down to show how to answer that particular problem. So now I want to talk a little bit about accessibility. One of the things that we like about Markdown as a formatting language for OER is that it enforces a navigational structure for the document by the use of headings. So on the left are different levels of headings. So basically every heading in Markdown is tagged with like a hash mark, and then a space, and then the heading text. So that's heading 1, and then there's some content below that, and then heading 2 with 2 hash marks, and then heading 3 would be 3 hash marks, and so on and so forth. And so what happens when this gets converted over to any format, so it could be PDF, EPUB, or HTML, a screen reader would see these headings and quickly be able to create an outline of the document to be able to quickly navigate around the text. So that's sort of what is happening in this slide, is that on the left is the Markdown content, and then on the right is sort of the outline that gets generated from those headings. Another thing that Markdown enforces and makes visible is that when you're adding something like an image to an OER, part of what is expected to be included in the image element is the alt text. So on the left is the Markdown for inserting an image of alpacas into an OER text. And so on the left is basically it's what's in brackets is the alt text, and then on the what's in the parentheses is the path to the image. And so that when Lantern produces whatever OER output format, it knows to grab that image from that particular path and then put the alt text associated with it in that particular place. And so what we do is we provide instructions on how to do this, but that's one of the things that is nice about Markdown, that kind of makes it more visible to you as you're editing the material. So in recap, Markdown generates simple markup for assistive technologies. We provide multiple formats for the OER projects. So HTML and EPUB documents are usually pretty good with assistive technologies. They can be much easier than PDF, DocX, or LaTeX in our experience. However, it's not an easy out from doing accessibility with your projects. There's a lot more to accessibility than headings and alt text. It really depends on the content of your work and other sorts of ways to, and it really depends on the content that you're bringing to your project. So, like I said, everything is available on GitHub. We have a wiki that provides we try to make it step-by-step tutorials on how to use all of the what Lantern provides. And then we have pages on doing things like citations, setting up configurations, adding metadata, preparing your manuscripts. All of that is on the wiki. And so I want to kind of close this sort of like lecture part of our presentation by talking about some of our sustainability goals with this project. One of the things that I've heard in my roles as an OER supporter is that it is extremely costly for an organization to have an OER program, and it is my belief that any sorts of funding or budgets should be diverted towards the people who are responsible for the creation, for the promotion, for the editing of OER. And that technology is not something that should be that costly because of the availability of things like open source and static web technologies. I just see there being, I just think that there's a lot more opportunity to use funds for the creation and editing of OER rather than the technology itself. And so what we found is that minimal computing, which is a concept that was developed from the digital humanities world, actually provides a lot of useful framework for what I think is a good framework for open education. It is very much concerned about sustainability and the preservation of digital texts. And so the idea of applying constraints around the hardware, network capacity, and software that you're using is that there's a recognition that the more dependencies you introduce into digital infrastructure, the more costly that infrastructure will be to maintain over the long term. And so while things like easy to use tools might save you time at the beginning of a project, that time will be made up later on when you're trying to sustain like a PHP server 5-10 years down the road. And in the library world, in my world, we are constantly dealing with old legacy projects that we've been hosting for decades that are really difficult to wean ourselves off of because of how complex and how much overhead there is in these bespoke web applications. And so that's why we like static web technologies, because it's just static HTML files that can be moved pretty much anywhere, and they don't need to be rendered by any server-side software. And so in the end, Lantern is really just an experiment to see if we can apply this methodology to the OER production. We hope that it might be something that's interesting to a few others and not just me. And we hope that you can learn it. And so right now I'm going to pass it back over to Lauren, and we have a demo video to show you how to get, like, what it looks like to get started on GitHub. So
wait, Lauren, don't start it yet. It goes so quickly.
Yeah, let me know
when you're... Okay, that I'm also interested in Lantern. It's not just you. So we have that, good. But I'm pretty sure others are interested.
A fear of mine is that Lauren's just being nice and humoring me.
I'll also provide a little bit more context about our partnership in this project. So we received a grant through the Association of Research Libraries to take on this project. And it was Chris's idea because these are Chris's methods that he uses for OER production. And I'm sort of the audience for something like this. We wanted to create a toolkit that would be easy for people who are librarians within the open education space, but who don't have programming experience. And so part of my role in this has been to take some of the more technical information that Chris is putting down and try to make it something that is easily readable by somebody who does not have a technology background. So anyway, that said, we created, and this is a lot of information, and so we wanted to create just a short demo of how to use Lantern, how to go from manuscript to published website. And so this is a 2-minute video, and I'm going to narrate as it goes. And some of it is, there are sort of quick transitions, so forgive me if I stumble over it. But when you start, so you're going to have to create a GitHub account. So you can go to GitHub, you can create a free account. And then once you're within GitHub, then you would copy and paste the Lantern URL that I put in the chat into GitHub so that you could find the Lantern repository. And then once you land on the Lantern repository page, you can click the big green button that says use this template. And now you can start. Okay, so I'm creating a new repository, and then you're going to have to name your repository. So you would probably name it the name of the class or the textbook. I use design thinking. You'll keep it public and then click create this repository. And then it's going to generate a repository that will be on your account. So this will be separate from the Lantern one. This is your own instance. And these are all the files and folders there. So the first thing that I did was I clicked on the metadata YAML file. And that's where you can add the book title information, author information, DOI, ISBN, things like that, a description. So here I'm just adding the title and author. And then as you make changes, you can use the native text editor there. There's a little pencil icon in the right that allows you to edit things right there. And then when you make an edit, you can describe the edit that you made so that there's a record of all of the edits that you're making. And then you'll click commit. So then from there, you can go to the original folder, and that's where you would upload your manuscript. So you would want to separate out your manuscript into chapter files, and then you can upload them. And then a few minutes later, they will automatically be converted to Markdown format and be available within the text folder. So here I am within the text folder. This is now my Markdown chapter, and then you can use the native editor to begin editing it and cleaning it up. So in my instance, I had a couple of things that transferred over sort of funnily, so I was cleaning up the text. And then it will allow you to preview it so that you can see what your text will look like. And then once you're done editing your text and you think that your book is ready to be published, you can click on Settings and then Pages, select the GitHub Pages branch, and then click Save, and then it's going to generate a website for you. So this is our website. You have the option of having it in light or dark. And then the chapters are linked right there. And then that will bring you to another page where you can see all of the chapters that you created as a menu in the left side. So that is a very fast overview of how to use it, but really it takes, I mean, if you wanted to get started and just test it out, you could probably go from starting your GitHub account to having a website in 15 or 20 minutes. All of the documentation walks you through the process of doing that. So all of the information that I just talked about is there within the wiki documentation. But of course, if anything is missing or anything is unclear, there are also ways to be able to submit feedback to us. So Chris, did you want to talk about how to do that?
Yeah, so when you're in logged into GitHub and you're on the Lantern homepage, there is a tab called Discussions. And it's essentially a discussion board where you can post a thread, introducing yourself and saying, hey, I had a question about this. And then we can chat using GitHub's discussion board. But you can also, you know, if you don't want to go public with your use of this, you can also just email us and we can chat. Here are our email addresses.
So that's all that we had to share. We would love to be able to answer your questions or to hear any comments that you might have about this.
You can go ahead and put your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A box, or if you'd like to speak, I'm happy to allow you to do so. Just raise your hand and I'll allow you to, I'll turn on your microphone for you.
I think we're used to having a lot less time to present. So apologies if we spoke pretty quickly at times, or if I did.
It looks like we do. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have a question. What are the advantages of Lantern over Pressbooks? I would like to dodge this question, mostly because I don't have any experience with Pressbooks, so I can't speak to that particular platform. What I can say is that, you know, using Lantern, and the reason why we wanted to create a toolkit or an on-ramp for these sorts of plain text static website methods is that you have a lot of control over the format and style and distribution of the content, that you don't need to rely on anyone else for assistance. You know, I kind of grew up with a heavy DIY ethos, and I tend to get frustrated with web-based systems. And so I really like using Lantern because it feels more like completely mine when I have that level of access to the underlying files, folders, and code and infrastructure. And so if that's appealing to you, and also, you know, with the bpress example earlier, I was a bpress user for many years, and so that hurt particularly hard when Elsevier suddenly became the owner of our open access platform. So I find that really appealing to just sort of feel like, you can apply a do-it-yourself methods to this type of work.
We have an audience question. How do images transfer into this? I'm not a tech person and it looked a bit confusing.
Right, so with images, everything in an OER project with Lantern is just files and folders. And so similar to how there's a text folder with all of the chapters or for the markdown content, there would be another folder called images where you would put all of the images in that folder. And then with Markdown, what you would do is you would put, you would use Markdown to say, here is where the image goes, and then a link to the path of that particular image file. And then Lantern will place that image in the proper location. Basically what you're doing with Markdown is saying insert image here, and then you tell it what image to do it. And then when the output format is generated, it automatically gets placed in that proper location.
And next up, we have, can multiple people collaborate on a text at one time?
Yes. GitHub is especially good at collaboration. And one thing that's really nice about it is that it's very attentive to multiple people editing the same file. So it's very difficult to overwrite someone else's changes when you're collaborating in a GitHub or Git-based project. But there's also a nice communication tool. So I showed the example of like the discussion board, which is more like general discussions about a project. But then there's also a feature called GitHub Issues, which is essentially a task list where you can add little cards that says, here's what needs to be done. I have questions about this. And then within each issue, you can have a discussion about like, I'm having trouble with chapter 4, or I'm having trouble with this particular image, or I'm not sure why this is rendering. It's a very good collaboration tool in my opinion.
There are a couple of questions in the chat that look like they are a bit related. One is, are there any plans to offer hands-on training workshops to teach users how to work with Lantern? And then the second is, how do you create buy-in from faculty, and do you provide training for instructors and administration?
I can take the training question. So originally, when we got this grant, we started developing this, part of our plan was to create hands-on training, and then the pandemic happened. And so that was sidetracked. And now we've been doing these conference presentations. I think that we probably will end up offering some sort of hands-on training. It will probably be virtual. It's not scheduled yet, but maybe sometime this summer we will do that. We will also make videos available on the Lantern wiki, so that if you are unable to attend a training, or if you need something other than just text to read to follow the instructions, we can do that. So any training that gets scheduled, we'll probably share it out over the OER listserv. So if you're subscribed to those listservs, you'll receive that communication. So look for that.
And because this is the second time we're speaking about this publicly, we haven't scheduled anything yet, but if you are interested, we would be happy to just meet with individuals to talk about it. Because, it is still, I don't know, being one of the people responsible for it, I always feel like it's going to be a work in progress. So it's hard to say that it's done, but, we're happy to sit with anyone who wants to spend an hour or two on a Zoom call with us, and we can get you started and hear your thoughts and feedback about it.
That's a great idea. I like
that. I can take the question about buy-in from faculty, and do you provide training for instructors or administration? So there, one of the reasons why, another reason why I think Lantern and Markdown in particular is useful is that when I started working with OER, a lot of the the authors were coming from like a LaTeX environment. Like they're used to writing their texts and their articles and their materials using LaTeX. And LaTeX does not convert to HTML easily at all. Like it's mostly just a PDF typesetting system. And so faculty in engineering and mathematics and in the more empirical social sciences who I spoke to about this were very much interested in learning Markdown and learning how to use these sorts of tools as a way to get off of LaTeX because of its ability to be formatted into multiple different outputs. So because Markdown can be transformed to EPUB, HTML, and PDF, that's a huge advantage over LaTeX. And so I did get some buy-in from our faculty authors who are interested in using more Markdown-based tools as opposed to LaTeX, but haven't spoken to anyone from administration about this. Not yet, at least, because we're still keeping it close to the chest.
Well, and also I'll just add on to that there are some faculty OER authors who are not working within Lantern because they wouldn't want to learn these processes, and so they're not editing it themselves. What they would do is they would give us their manuscript in Word document format, and then if after the OER is published they wanted to be able to edit it, then they would go to Chris to make the edits on their document. So I guess we haven't needed buy-in from them because they've just been working with us to create
Usually
their OER.
They're just so exhausted from writing the content, they don't want to think about the formatting.
Yes.
We do have a bit more time, so if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. And as I said, I'm happy to unmute your microphones. If you'd like to speak, just raise your hand for that. I do want to thank our presenters. I thought this was a fantastic presentation, so thank you so much for joining us today. While we're waiting to see if any additional questions come in, I'll just announce a couple of quick things. Please provide your feedback on this session through the survey that will pop up. Once the session has ended, it will pop up through Zoom once you've closed out of the session. The next session is OER Policy, Accomplishment, Trends, and Opportunities, and that will be at 1 p.m. today, and we hope to see you there. And again, we just have a few more minutes, so if you'd like to ask anything else, please go ahead and do so. Ramyana says, can you give a link to where the published OER textbooks can be seen?
I think that should work. Oh, I might not have sent that to everyone. Hold on. Here's a link to the OER example that we referred to multiple times.
Yeah, that's the one OER example. And I actually need to add that link to this page. We have a website for open educational resources at Northwestern. OER, sorry, I sent you the wrong page. The OER at Northwestern page has links to a few of our projects, but you can feel free to browse the site.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, thank you both so much for attending the conference this year. This was wonderful. Oh, wait, we have another one. Have you tried working with LibreText Remixer?
I have not.
I have not, no. I've heard of LibreText, but I don't know about any of their tools or content.
Is that what you use?
Yeah.
I've seen it, but not used it. Yeah. I played around with a couple of, I know OER Commons has an OER creation tool, and I've played around with that, but I haven't used LibreText before.
Tracy says, thank you. You've made this all look so easy. Jaren says, thank you. All right, sounds like there might not be any more questions. So once again, thank you. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.